Microsoft took the game that built Xbox, poured who knows how many millions into rebuilding it from the ground up, and somehow handed it back to fans as the lowest-rated mainline Halo the franchise has ever produced. Halo: Campaign Evolved launches on July 28, 2026, and right now it sits at an 81 on Metacritic, which for a series whose first game earned a 97 reads less like a comeback and more like a controlled demolition. We're going to walk through all of it because the strange part isn't that the game is getting criticized, it's who's doing the criticizing, why they happen to be right, and how a studio throwing itself a 25th anniversary party managed to step on every rake in the yard on the way to the cake. Let me lay out what this actually is, because the title alone is pulling a quiet little con. Halo: Campaign Evolved rebuilds the 2001 original Halo Combat Evolved from scratch. The people behind it work at Halo Studios, and if that name rings unfamiliar, that's because it used to be 343 Industries, the same team in the same Redmond, Washington building with a fresh logo bolted to the door. They rebranded to signal what they called a philosophical reset, a clean break from the past, which lands a little strangely when the very next thing out the gate is a remake of a game from 2001. Nothing announces a clean break from the past quite like selling people the past at full price. Xbox Game Studios publishes it, Unreal Engine 5 powers it instead of the in-house engine that ran Halo Infinite, and for the first time in the franchise's entire history, it's arriving on PlayStation 5. Picture Master Chief running around on a Sony console. Hand that image to a 2007 Xbox loyalist, and you'd watch the smoke pour out of their ears. Here's the word doing all the sneaky work in that title, and it's campaign, not combat. And that single swap tells you everything. This remake contains the campaign and nothing but the campaign. There's no competitive multiplayer, no player versus player, and no firefight. That wave-based survival mode people have loved for years. A franchise arguably more famous for its multiplayer than its story had its multiplayer surgically removed. Sit with that for a second, because everything else we're about to cover flows downstream from that one decision. Halo's multiplayer was never a side dish. For a whole generation, the multiplayer simply was Halo, the split-screen chaos, the 4 controllers jammed into one console, the friend who parked himself on the sniper spawn and never left. That's the nostalgia people actually carry, and a remake selling itself on nostalgia, launching on the 25th anniversary specifically to tug that heartstring, looked at the most nostalgic feature in the entire series and decided to leave it in the bin. They stamped Campaign Evolved on the box as though cutting the game in half counts as a feature. Imagine your favorite childhood diner reopening under a banner reading "The Legend Returns," and then you sit down to discover they only serve the appetizers now. Same building, decent food, but you didn't drive across town for half a meal. Which brings us straight to the money, because handing people half the meal really ought to come with half the bill, and that discount never shows up. $50 buys the standard edition of Campaign Evolved, and $70 buys the premium edition, the one that unlocked early access on July 23rd. $50 for a game on its own is no scandal. The scandal lives entirely in the comparison. Set the price next to what already exists, because the Master Chief Collection bundles the entire original Halo campaign plus a stack of other Halo games for $40. Kotaku's reviewers said the math simply doesn't add up, the collection with everything crammed inside going for $40, while this campaign-only remake with no PvP and no firefight asks $50. Pull the lens back further and it curdles. Back in 2011 there was Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, a remaster of this very same game, and it launched at $40 while scoring an 82 on Metacritic. The 2011 version delivered the whole thing for $40 and landed an 82, whereas the 2026 version delivers half the modes for $50 and landed an 81. 14 years of so-called progress bought you more money for less game and a score 1 point lower. So the obvious question of who this is even built for keeps getting dodged, and the honest answer stings. A longtime Halo fan already owns the Master Chief Collection, already plays the original campaign with its multiplayer intact, and pays less to do it. Even the reviewers land on the same conclusion, that this remake really targets two crowds: the total newcomers who find the old game too dated to look at, and PlayStation players who've never once been allowed near Halo. Building a return to the legend around the only two groups with no nostalgia for the legend takes a special kind of nerve. Now for the AI, and I don't mean Cortana yet, we'll get to her. When the game was revealed, Halo Studios sat down with Rolling Stone and got asked about generative AI in development, and the answer they gave was a lesson in saying nothing at all. Their words were that people make games, that generative AI should be additive to the creation of a game, and my personal favorite, that the boundary lines can get a little fuzzy. That phrase, the boundary lines can get a little fuzzy, is corporate speak for please stop asking us this question. A studio confident it barely touched AI simply says it barely touched AI. A studio reaching for fog that thick has fans hearing we used far more than we'll ever admit on the record. and reading it that way is completely fair because nobody wraps themselves in mist that dense unless something's hiding inside it. Then the fog thinned a little once players got their hands on it. One of the loudest complaints pouring out of early access centered on the French version where players allege the voices are AI generated. A single Steam reviewer summed it up more sharply than any of us could, saying the original voices would have left them feeling more respected, and that swapping in AI voices instead is an insult to your community. An insult to your community delivered on the 25th anniversary, and that single line holds the whole story. You gathered fans from every corner of the world for a quarter-century celebration, and depending on which language you happen to speak, the game apparently couldn't be bothered to hire a human to speak the words. Buying the anniversary edition of the thing you love, only to find it can't pronounce your language with a real person, is its own quiet insult. Cortana, as promised. She's the AI companion talking to Master Chief throughout the game, a real human-written character iconic to the series, and this remake altered her in two ways nobody asked for. First came the look. They redesigned her, and fans pushed back on the new appearance the moment it surfaced in marketing, long before the game shipped, describing it as uncanny and unsettling, a sharp departure from the iconic holographic blue figure everyone grew up with. When a redesign of a beloved character unsettles people before they've even pressed start, that's a warning label. The second change cuts deeper because it never stops. Throughout the remake, Cortana simply will not be quiet, hurling helpful little tips at every turn. Quippy lines stacked one on top of another, narrating what to do as if you've never gripped a controller in your life. One fan actually begged the studio to delay the helpful quips by a couple of seconds, just enough for players to sit in the moment and take the game in on their own. That request carries real sadness, someone asking the game to hush for 2 seconds so they can look at it. And that's what modern AAA design did to an atmospheric, horror-tinged sci-fi masterpiece, turning it into a tour guide too busy pointing at the view to let anyone enjoy it. All of it traces back to a single instinct, the thread running underneath everything. Every one of these changes springs from the same reflex: take a game that trusted the player and childproof it, which is the perfect cue to talk about sprint. The original Halo never let you sprint, keeping you at a deliberate, weighty pace, and that wasn't a limitation, it was the whole design. The measured movement feeding the tension, the atmosphere, the urge to explore. You had room to notice things. Sprint didn't even enter the series until Halo, Reach years later, and now it's baked into the remake. In fairness, you can switch sprint off. That objection, though, misses the point so completely it loops back around and proves it. Nobody's complaining that the game physically forces them to sprint. The real gripe is that the entire experience got rebuilt around the idea that you will, with fans pointing out that sprint lets players blow straight past the iconic set pieces, race through spaces designed to be lingered in, and drain the tension right out of them. You can toggle the button off, yet you can't toggle off a game engineered for a faster, twitchier, less patient player than the one the original respected. Hearing all this, you might file it under grumpy fans allergic to change. Old man yells at Warthog, the easy dismissal. That dismissal collapses on one fact. The single loudest, most credible critic of this remake isn't some random voice on Reddit, it's the man who designed the original game. Jaime Griesemer worked as one of the key developers on the original Halo. CampaignEvolved designed much of the campaign and built Halo's legendary 30 seconds of fun gameplay loop, the core rhythm that made the whole series feel good in the hands. These days, he serves as creative director at another studio. This is no hater. This is the architect, and he went online and set the thing on fire. Walk through what he actually said, because the escalation is a thing of beauty. On remakes as a whole, his words were that remakes and remasters are soul-destroying and that he feels for any dev working on one, that they can't win, and even when they do, they won't get credit. A bad situation unless the money's good. Right from the opening, the original designer branded this category of project soul-destroying and openly pitied the developers stuck making it. Then it sharpened. Asked point-blank whether he thought the game looked good, Griesemer delivered the line that traveled everywhere: that it seems like a very well-made mod, and that he's sure it was quite expensive. He twisted the knife by adding that it's a mod for a great game. A very well-made mod from the guy who built the original, aimed at your $50 anniversary remake. You cannot buy worse press than the creator of the thing squinting at your version and calling it a cute little fan project. He wasn't finished, and this is where it gets truly telling, because he didn't wave his hands about vibes, he pointed at specific design changes and explained precisely why each one is wrong, which a random hater literally cannot do. He flagged a level design change letting players drive the Warthog up a slope to steamroll the hunters, enemies meant to be a real threat, and explained that in the original he intentionally planted rocks there to stop exactly that, because he wanted you fighting the hunters on foot, a deliberate choice made by him for a reason, and the remake bulldozed it. He labeled that change the most comically unnecessary embellishment in the whole announcement, and said he wasn't sure it was an intentional satire. His eye caught more. They'd bolted an ammo counter onto a weapon that, by his description, already is an ammo counter. Some added trees in a jump's landing area earned the specific title of the worst part. That's the granularity here, the designer running a line-by-line teardown of his own game. Someone in his replies accused him of merely crying about nostalgia, the exact dismissal from a minute ago, and his answer is this entire video compressed into one sentence, that he made it right and they are breaking it for no reason. There's no comeback to that. The man who built the house is watching someone knock out the load-bearing walls to fit a bigger television. And this isn't blind nostalgia talking, because when fans discovered clever ways to break his original design, sneaking the warthog past his rocks, he praised them, calling one workaround very clever. He's no grump treating the old game as flawless and untouchable. He simply grasps that stripping out the design choices that limited the player strips out the choices that were the entire point. Those limits weren't bugs, they were the game. He even diagnosed the deeper sickness, sharper than anything I could write, describing how Halo Studios keeps flip-flopping across two impossible goals. On one side, yanking Halo out of 2001 to modernize it, on the other, hauling players back to 2001 on a wave of nostalgia, and he sees neither road going anywhere. That's the trap swallowing this whole game. Too scared to change anything meaningful, too busy fiddling with all the wrong small things to stand as a faithful restoration, it's wedged in the middle, pleasing nobody, which happens to be the one point every single critic agrees on. Now to the part where the game plane doesn't work right. Stacked on top of the design fights, the AI fog, and the missing modes, the launch itself landed rough. Out of early access, players reported crashes during firefights, the actual shooting, the one thing the entire game consists of. On PC, mouse and keyboard input reportedly feels delayed. Multiple reviews called out poor performance and shoddy optimization. Players noted that switching motion blur off didn't seem to actually switch it off, and that reload animations felt unfinished. Then there's the bug almost too funny to be real. Some players found that with the digital artbook installed, the game would boot straight into the artbook instead of the game itself. You handed over as much as $70, pressed play, and got a slideshow of concept art. That's not a launch, that's a screensaver with extra steps. Here's the detail capturing the corporate soul of this entire thing. On PS5, the game demands an always online internet connection to run, despite carrying no PvP multiplayer whatsoever. There's nothing to connect to, no versus mode, no matchmaking, nothing needing a server. You're playing a single-player campaign from 2001, and it still insists on phoning home first. Nobody seems to know what it's checking. It refuses to let you play the game it already sold you until the internet gives its blessing, inside a game with zero online competitive component. Split screen carries its own small tragedy. Two friends, one couch, one screen, the beating heart of Halo nostalgia, and the remake does bring back two-player local split screen only on console. On PC, there's nothing. The kicker that fans dug up is that the split screen code apparently still sits inside the PC version. The config flag literally switched to true, just hidden away from the menus. They didn't lack the ability to do it on PC. The parts shipped in the box, they simply never plugged them in. One player put it flatly that there's zero reason this game shouldn't have split screen, since that's literally where most people's nostalgia for it lives. Before launch, they even fumbled the PlayStation split screen messaging so badly that early wording made it sound like both players would need a paid PlayStation Plus subscription just for couch co-op. They later walked it back and clarified you don't. Yet the first impression that they'd charge 2 subscriptions so you could sit on your own sofa tells you exactly where everyone's head was. Add every piece of this together and you reach the receipts, the part revealing that it isn't a handful of angry fans, it's the real scoreboard. Over on Metacritic, Halo CampaignEvolved holds an 81. An 81 sounds perfectly fine in a vacuum, and context flips it completely because that 81 makes it the lowest rated mainline Halo game on Metacritic to date. It's scored beneath Halo 3, ODST at an 83 beneath the games people spent years grumbling about. This flagship franchise, celebrating 25 years, produced its lowest scoring mainline entry ever on the anniversary as the Grand Return, which is a strange way to blow out the candles. Here comes the number that should settle the whole argument. The original Halo, CampaignEvolved, the game this remake is built from, holds a 97 on Metacritic. The gap runs a full 16 points, from the original's 97 down to the remake's 81, and they managed that decline with the entire finished masterpiece sitting right there as reference. They had the blueprint in hand, and they still shed 16 points on what was meant to be the upgrade. The players swing harder than the critics. During early access on Steam, the game settled at a 69% approval rating, which Valve officially files under mixed. I'll be honest with you, since these numbers are live and shifting through launch week, that figure could move. Still, a mixed rating for a Halo game on its anniversary, coming from the fans devoted enough to buy the pricey early access edition, is not the crowd you want turning on you. Those are the faithful. When the faithful hand you a shrug, the trouble's already real. I'll hand you the other side too, because you should walk away armed rather than merely angry. An 81 still technically reads as generally favorable. A couple of outlets even awarded perfect scores. And the defender's central argument holds real weight, that if you've genuinely never touched Halo, or you're a PlayStation player getting a first ever crack at it, this is a competent, good-looking, faithful way into one of the greatest games ever built. And that's fair. The bones underneath remain a 97 scoring original, and nobody can fully wreck that. Look closer at what the positive reviews actually say though, because it's quietly devastating. The praise never reaches bold, or fresh, or a must-play. The praise lands on the words, "It's fine." Games Radar called it a wasted opportunity for a new spin on a classic. Windows Central liked it while admitting they wanted more for the asking price. Across the board, the critique circles the same words, overly cautious, not daring enough. Read underneath those lines and it stings. The warmest thing this game's own fans can muster is that it didn't fumble the parts it copied. Everything it added, removed, or modernized is precisely where the damage sits. It's coasting entirely on credit earned 25 years ago by a different team. Here's the piece that lays the priorities bare. There's a secret ending waiting at the finish. Beat the game on the hardest difficulty, and you land a scene where Sergeant Johnson stares straight into the camera, breaks the fourth wall, and says, "See you in the sequel." A bonus scene right after teases a remake of Halo 2, with Halo 3 lined up behind it. Let that fully settle for a moment. Before this remake is even fully out, before the reviews have cooled, before the paint dries on the lowest rated mainline Halo in history, the game is already winking about the next 2 remakes it wants to sell you. Nobody's been convinced this one was a good idea, and they're already queuing up the sequels to the idea. That's a business plan with a cutscene. Whether the game flops outright is impossible to call right now. It's on Xbox Game Pass day 1, riding the anniversary hype, finally handing PlayStation players their turn, so downloads will pile up regardless. I'm not about to promise sales figures I don't have. A flop, though, isn't only about how many people booted up in week 1, it's about what the whole affair does to trust. And on that scale, this thing is already in trouble. Here's what really unfolded. A studio that renamed itself to outrun its own reputation marked the 25th anniversary of the game that built Xbox by charging more for less, drowning the AI question in fog, redesigning a beloved character into something fans called unsettling, packing the game with hand-holding it never needed and sprint it never had, shipping it broken enough to launch into an art book, locking a single-player campaign behind an always-online check for no reason, and burying the one feature everyone actually wanted, then summoned the confidence to tease 2 more of these before the first had even cleared the room. Through all of it, the man who built the original stood in the corner saying it plainly, for everyone to hear that he made it right and they are breaking it for no reason. That's a franchise that forgot what made it worth remaking in the first place. The fans aren't wrong to be angry, they're the only ones in this entire mess still holding on to what Halo was supposed to feel like. When the fans and the very creator of the game plant themselves on the same side of the line, while the studio stands alone on the other teasing sequels, the choice makes itself. And it isn't landing on the people who decided CampaignEvolved was a clever name for cutting the game in half. Halo, Combat Evolved earned a 97 and rewired gaming forever, while Halo, CampaignEvolved earned an 81 and still can't work out who it's for. 16 points, 25 years, and somehow the wrong direction entirely. If you took the fans' side on this one, you're in strong company, standing right beside the guy who designed the thing. Drop your worst Cortana quip down in the comments, tell me which remake you're dreading the "see you in the sequel" treatment for next, and I'll catch you in the next one.